Why was everyone ignoring her at the briefing table? The mess hall at Naval Station Westbrook buzzed with the ordinary rhythm of lunch hour, forks clinking, laughter echoing against steel and glass, sunlight cutting through tall windows in golden shafts that caught the faint shimmer of dust. It was the sound of routine, of men and women who had spent years inside the machinery of the military, rigid, structured, predictable. No one noticed her at first. She was just another figure in the endless sea of uniforms, standard naval utilities, sleeves rolled just above the wrist, name tag missing, rank insignia absent. Her dark hair was pulled tight into a regulation bun, her face calm, expression unreadable. She moved with quiet efficiency, like someone who had learned long ago how to be invisible when it mattered. Her name was Katherine Morgan, 42 years old, a woman who, on the surface, appeared unremarkable, except for the faint scar running down her right cheekbone, a pale reminder of something most people would rather forget. But what she carried beneath that stillness was something far heavier than the steel she wore. She approached the coffee station, poured a measured amount into a standard-issue mug, and stood silently for a moment. The sunlight hit her face just right, enough for a few sailors nearby to notice that her eyes weren't the eyes of someone on base duty. They were sharper, calculating, always searching. And then, a voice, sharp and commanding, broke through the hum of the mess hall. "You think you can stand there like you own the place?" The tone was unmistakable, authority laced with anger. Heads turned. Conversations died mid-sentence. The sound of clinking silverware stopped altogether. Captain Marcus Fletcher. He was a big man, 6 feet tall, square-jawed, uniform perfect, ribbons aligned with surgical precision. Combat service in Iraq, Afghanistan, and Somalia hung from his chest like proof of his worth. He was one of those officers whose presence filled a room before he even spoke. Now that presence was aimed squarely at her. Katherine didn't move, she didn't blink. She turned slowly, her mug steady in her hand. "Sir, I was simply getting coffee before my next meeting. No disrespect intended." Her voice was calm, measured, no defensiveness, no submission, just facts. But Fletcher's expression hardened. He stepped forward, eyes narrowing. "Your next meeting? What meeting could possibly be important enough to ignore basic military courtesy?" She looked at him evenly. "Perhaps we can discuss this privately, Captain. No need to disrupt the mess hall." That single sentence drew a quiet ripple through the room. It wasn't defiance, but it wasn't obedience either. It was control. And that made Fletcher furious. He stepped closer, too close. His boots echoed against the tile, his breath audible now. The air thickened, a storm gathering inside a silent room. At a nearby table, Sergeant James Rodriguez, a 35-year veteran with more scars than stripes, shifted uneasily. He'd seen fights before. He'd seen young soldiers crack under pressure. But this was something different. The energy between those two, the calm precision of the woman, the coiled aggression of the man, felt volatile. And then it happened. A sharp, deliberate movement. The sound of skin meeting skin echoed like a gunshot. Fletcher's open hand struck her across the face with enough force to snap her head to the side. The entire room froze. No one breathed, no one moved. Katherine didn't stumble, she didn't drop the mug. Not a single drop of coffee spilled. Slowly, deliberately, she raised her left hand and touched her cheek, the faint mark of the slap already forming against her skin. Her eyes lifted back to meet Fletcher. Something had changed in that gaze. Gone was the neutral mask. In its place was something deeper, an ancient, quiet strength that sent chills through the veterans who recognized it. It was the look of someone who had seen death up close and learned not to flinch. "Thank you for the demonstration, Captain," she said softly. "That will be sufficient." And then she turned and walked out. No shouting, no retaliation, just silence following her out the door. Rodriguez's jaw tightened. Something in his gut told him that this, whatever had just happened, was going to explode far beyond this room. Fletcher stood, chest heaving, pretending victory, but the silence in the hall wasn't respect. It was shock, the kind that comes when people realize a line been crossed. Minutes later, Rodriguez pushed away from his tray and made for the communications center. Years of service had taught him one thing: trust your instincts. And right now, his instincts were screaming. The small, dimly lit comms center hummed with low electronic noise. Petty Officer Hayes, barely 22, looked up as Rodriguez entered. "Hayes, I need a personnel check," quietly. Hayes blinked. "What kind of check, Sergeant?" "Woman in the mess hall, about 20 minutes ago. Captain Fletcher had an altercation with her. 5'4", dark hair, scar on her cheek. No rank insignia, probably mid-40s. The younger man started typing, fingers tapping rapidly against the keys. The glowing blue light reflected off his glasses. "Any unit designation?" "That's what I'm trying to find out." Rodriguez stared at the terminal. He'd been around long enough to know someone who took a hit like that without blinking, without even spilling coffee, wasn't normal. That was training, real training, the kind that doesn't get written into official manuals. Minutes passed. Hayes frowned at the screen. "Sergeant, I'm not finding anyone like that in our active duty roster." Rodriguez's brow furrowed. "Check the visitor log, distinguished visitors, anyone with high-level clearance." Hayes's fingers flew faster. After a long pause, he froze. The color drained from his face. "Sir, there's a security flag on this file. She arrived yesterday, but her record requires admiral-level clearance." Rodriguez exhaled slowly. 35 years in uniform, and he'd only heard those words twice before. "Who authorized the visit?" "Authorization traces back to the Pentagon," Hayes whispered. "No name attached, just a code Tier 1 oversight." The sergeant's stomach sank. That phrase, Tier 1 oversight, wasn't something you saw unless you were brushing against something black, deep black. He took a breath. "Log this inquiry. State that we're responding to a potential security concern involving unauthorized physical contact with a restricted visitor." Hayes hesitated. "That'll flag us, Sergeant." "Good, let them know someone noticed." As he turned to leave, the door opened. Lieutenant Sarah Morrison stood in the doorway, her expression unreadable. "Sergeant Rodriguez, Colonel Patterson requests your presence immediately." Rodriguez followed her out, his pulse steady but heavy. It had been less than an hour since the incident. The speed at which this was moving confirmed what he already knew: this wasn't going to stay quiet. Inside Colonel William Patterson's office, the blinds were half drawn, sunlight slicing across the room in uneven bars. Patterson was hunched over a monitor, face pale, fingers steepled beneath his chin. "Sergeant," Patterson said without looking up, "I understand there was an incident in the mess hall." "Yes, sir. Captain Fletcher struck a woman who appeared to be unranked personnel." "And this woman, what was her reaction?" Rodriguez swallowed. "Sir, she didn't react at all." Patterson turned the monitor so Rodriguez could see the screen. The image froze on the woman's face, the same calm expression, the same scar. The text beside the photo made Rodriguez's throat tighten. "Major Katherine Morgan, United States Navy. Formerly attached to SEAL Team 6. Distinguished Service Cross, Navy Cross, Silver Star 2 oak leaf clusters, Purple Heart 3 clusters. Current assignment: Pentagon Deputy Director of Special Operations Assessment Division. Status: active. Classification: Ghost Protocol Class 1. Rodriguez's eyes widened. Ghost Protocol. He'd heard the whispers. A black budget program from decades ago, operators trained not to exist, capable of blending in anywhere, gathering intelligence unseen, executing missions that never appeared on any record. And she'd just been assaulted in a base cafeteria. Patterson rubbed his temple. She's here on an unannounced inspection. Pentagon assessment of special operations facilities. He clicked play on the security footage. The screen came alive with crisp angles of the mess hall, every detail captured, the strike, her stillness, the stunned silence that followed. The colonel's phone buzzed. He answered, listened for 10 seconds, and went pale. "Admiral Jackson's office just called," he said, his voice low. "A team of generals is en route, ETA 3 hours. Rodriguez nodded grimly. "Sir, does Captain Fletcher know who he hit?" Patterson looked up. "Not yet, but he's about to find out." In his quarters, Captain Fletcher sat at his desk, typing his incident report with the self-assurance of a man convinced of his righteousness. The words flowed easily. Failure to salute, disrespect to superior officer, physical correction administered to reinforce discipline. He paused, rubbed the scar on his forearm. A ghost from Kandahar, 2008. A convoy, an IED, 2 men dead. The intelligence officer who gave the route clearance had been a woman. He, never forgiven her or what she represented. His phone rang. "Captain Fletcher, report to Colonel Patterson's office, immediately." He stood, straightened his uniform, and walked out, still unaware that every step was carrying him toward the end of his career. 15 minutes later, he was standing at attention before Patterson's desk. "Captain," Patterson began evenly, "describe what occurred in the mess hall." Fletcher repeated his report, tone confident, eyes steady. "A subordinate displayed improper military courtesy. I administered corrective discipline." Patterson listened silently, then he leaned forward. "Captain, did you verify this person's identity before taking action?" "Sir, she was clearly junior personnel. No rank insignia, no respect. I acted within." A knock at the door interrupted him. Captain Williams entered, breath slightly short. "Sir, 3 helicopters approaching from the northeast. Pentagon markings. ETA 15 minutes. Patterson's voice dropped an octave. "Dismissed." He turned back to Fletcher. "Captain, I need you to understand something very important." He rose from his chair and walked to the window, eyes on the horizon. The faint outlines of incoming aircraft shimmered in the sunlight. "The woman you struck was not junior personnel. She was Major Katherine Morgan, Deputy Director of Special Operations Assessment, Pentagon." Fletcher's face drained of color. "She's the daughter of Admiral Thomas Jackson, commander of Naval Special Warfare Command." The silence that followed was deafening. Outside, the first helicopter touched down. And the world, as Fletcher knew it, began to unravel. Why were 3 generals flying to a small coastal base over one slap? The first helicopter touched down on the parade ground in a storm of dust and rotor wash. The air shimmered with noise and authority. 3 figures stepped out, their uniforms immaculate, their bearing unmistakable. You didn't need to see the stars on their shoulders to know who they were. Every movement said power. Inside Colonel Patterson's office, Captain Fletcher stood stiff as a statue, sweat beading at his temple. He was still trying to process the words echoing in his head. "She's Admiral Jackson's daughter." It didn't make sense. None of it did. He'd spent his life believing he could read people, rank, attitude, bearing, but Katherine Morgan hadn't given off the air of power. She'd been calm, too calm. It had unsettled him, drawn out a rage he'd buried for years. Now that rage had detonated his career. Outside, the roar of another helicopter drew closer. Patterson's phone buzzed again. He listened, nodded once, and hung up. "Captain Fletcher," he said, voice tight with contained fury, "you are hereby placed under house arrest pending investigation by Pentagon Command Authority. You will remain in your quarters under guard until instructed otherwise." Fletcher's lips parted, disbelief flickering across his face. "Sir, Captain, ignorance is not a defense. You assaulted a superior officer during an official inspection. You will remain silent unless addressed." dismissed. Two military police entered as Patterson spoke. The sound of their boots against the floor was the sound of finality. Fletcher's career, decades of medals, deployments, and self-importance, ended in that echo. He was escorted out, eyes darting toward the window as the second helicopter descended. Inside the cockpit of that aircraft sat Lieutenant General Robert Harrison, a man with 3 decades of battlefield experience and a reputation for unraveling military scandals with surgical precision. Alongside him were Major General Anthony Roberts and Brigadier General Maria Martinez. Their combined presence represented something larger than any single base. This was Washington's wrath, airborne and armed with authority. When they entered the command building, conversations died in mid-breath. Rodriguez watched from a distance as they passed, 3 embodiments of accountability. He'd seen combat in 2 wars, but there was something about watching the chain of command in motion that carried its own quiet intimidation. This wasn't about bullets. It was about consequence. In the conference room, the air was heavy with tension. The blinds were closed. The hum of a projector filled the silence as footage from the mess hall flickered onto a wall-mounted screen. No one spoke. The sound played. Fletcher's voice, "You think you can stand there like you own the place." Then the strike, the audible gasp of 100 witnesses, the stillness that followed. When the video ended, General Harrison's voice cut through the quiet. "That," he said, "is not just misconduct. That is a failure of leadership from the top down." Colonel Patterson stood at attention, sweat glistening at his collar. "Sir, I accept full—" "No, Colonel," Harrison interrupted. "Not yet. Acceptance means nothing without accountability. We'll determine where that accountability begins and ends." He turned to his aides. "Seal the base. No one in or out without authorization. Every witness from that mess hall is to be debriefed. I want full communication lockdown and control of all external channels. Understood?" "Yes, sir." The machine had begun. By late afternoon, the base no longer felt like a naval installation. It felt like a containment zone. MPs stood guard at the gates. Communications were rerouted through encrypted Pentagon channels, and whispers replaced the sound of marching boots. In the small communications hub, Petty Officer Hayes sat with 2 federal technicians combing through encrypted message logs. The tension was palpable. Every outgoing email, every radio call in the last 72 hours, one of the technicians ordered. Hayes swallowed. "That'll take hours." "Then start now." For a moment, Hayes glanced at the flickering monitor that still showed the paused image of Katherine Morgan. Head turned, expression unreadable, the faint bruise just visible. He muttered to himself, "Who is she?" In another corner of the base, Katherine Morgan stood in front of a mirror, the faint red mark still visible on her cheek. Her face was calm, but her reflection betrayed a storm she refused to let surface. She'd seen violence before, much worse. She'd been shot at, interrogated, left in dark rooms halfway across the world. But this was different. It wasn't about pain. It was about the culture that permitted it. She adjusted her uniform collar, straightened the bars of her rank, and exhaled. Her phone buzzed with a secure call. "Morgan," she answered. "Kate," a voice said, steady, low, and familiar. "It's your father." Her throat tightened almost imperceptibly. She hadn't heard him use that tone since she was a teenager. "Admiral," she corrected softly, keeping the conversation formal. There was a pause. "I saw the footage. I assumed you would." "How bad?" "Superficial," she said. "It's not about the bruise." "I know," he replied, his voice lowering. "It's about the institution." Silence stretched between them. "I'm not intervening," he said finally. "You know that. I wouldn't expect you to." But beneath the professionalism, there was a weight neither of them voiced, a father's guilt, a daughter's restraint. When the line disconnected, Morgan stood there for a long moment, staring at her reflection. Then she whispered to no one, "Sometimes silence speaks louder than anger." As evening fell, the investigation room glowed with the cold light of screens. Rows of documents lined the table: witness statements, personnel records, behavioral reports. General Harrison stood at the head of the table. "We've identified a pattern," he said. "Captain Fletcher has 3 prior incidents involving excessive force and verbal intimidation, all handled informally." Brigadier General Martinez frowned. "Informally. Verbal counseling only, no written reprimands." "Who authorized that?" "Colonel Patterson." Martinez leaned back in her chair, her tone sharp. So the colonel knew he had an officer with behavioral issues, and he kept him in command. "Yes, ma'am." Claimed his combat record outweighed personality issues. "That rationale," she said, "has broken more commands than combat ever did." The room fell quiet. Everyone knew what that meant. This wasn't just about one man's aggression. It was about a system built to protect its own. Meanwhile, Fletcher sat alone in his quarters. The guards outside his door might as well have been ghosts. He replayed the scene in his head over and over, the way she hadn't flinched, the stillness in her eyes. That stillness haunted him more than her words. He rubbed the scar on his arm again. The IED in Kandahar, the screams. The moment his anger toward one officer, one woman, had metastasized into something uglier, something he'd never faced. His tablet buzzed with an incoming message: "Preliminary investigation, pending court-martial review." He stared at the words for a long time. Then, for the first time in years, he felt fear. Not the fear of death, but of exposure. The next morning came gray and cold. Naval Station Westbrook was under total lockdown. Helicopters remained parked like watchful hawks on the landing pad. Soldiers moved with the subdued awareness that history was unfolding in front of them. Inside the command building, Morgan entered the conference room to give her statement. Every head turned. She wore her full uniform now, ribbons aligned perfectly, the sheen of authority unmistakable. The same woman from the mess hall, now revealed in her full reality. The transformation was stunning. General Harrison nodded to her. "Major Morgan, thank you for agreeing to this. Please describe the incident for the record." Her tone was calm, clinical. She spoke like she was reading from an after-action report, but her words carried weight. "Captain Fletcher initiated a verbal confrontation concerning my failure to salute. I attempted to de-escalate and suggested privacy to avoid disrupting morale. He chose to respond physically." "You made no attempt to identify yourself?" Harrison asked. "No, sir. My assessment would have been compromised if I revealed my role. The purpose of my visit was to evaluate command climate and behavioral integrity." Martinez raised an eyebrow. "So you allowed the incident to unfold?" "I allowed it to reveal truth," Morgan replied. The generals exchanged looks. What she said wasn't arrogance, it was strategy. She had turned her own assault into evidence. "Major," Harrison said after a pause, "you understand the ramifications of this?" "Yes, sir. But if one officer's behavior exposes systemic failure, perhaps that's what was needed." There was silence again, one heavy with respect. By evening, Washington had taken full control of the narrative. Secure lines buzzed from the Pentagon to the White House. Admiral Thomas Jackson stood in his office, surrounded by screens showing news anchors speculating about an incident at a naval base. They didn't know the names yet, but they would. His aide entered, voice low. "Sir, the Secretary of Defense is requesting confirmation that you'll attend tomorrow's on-site briefing." Jackson's jaw clenched. "Tell him I'll be there." He turned toward the window overlooking the Capitol. His reflection looked older tonight, more human. For years, he'd taught his officers that leadership was about bearing the weight of others' mistakes. Now, it was personal. Outside, lightning flashed in the distance. The storm was moving in. That night in her quarters, Morgan sat by the window, watching the rain trail down the glass. The base was silent except for the rhythmic sweep of searchlights. She thought about every mission she'd ever completed: covert extractions, silent infiltrations, battles that never made the news. None of them had prepared her for the quiet violence of bureaucracy or the wounds inflicted by arrogance in uniform. Still, she didn't regret it. Some truths only surface when someone refuses to stay silent. She touched her cheek, where the bruise had already begun to fade, and whispered softly to herself, almost like a prayer. Sometimes the hardest missions happen at home. Outside, the storm broke fully, thunder rolling over the base, wind rattling the flagpole. And beneath that storm, change was already taking root. Why did the admiral arrive without his uniform? The sky above Naval Station Westbrook was still pale with morning haze when the convoy appeared at the horizon, 5 black SUVs escorted by a pair of military motorcycles. They came fast, silent, a rolling wave of power wrapped in tinted glass and federal insignias. Soldiers straightened instinctively, as if the wind itself had barked a command. Inside the lead vehicle sat Admiral Thomas Jackson, head of Naval Special Warfare Command, and father of Major Katherine Morgan. He wore no dress uniform today, just a dark field jacket, plain slacks, and a face carved from stone. There were no medals, no ribbons, no public ceremony, only purpose. He didn't come as a symbol of authority. He came as something older, something heavier. A man carrying 2 wars, one against the system he helped build, and another against the guilt of what it had done to his daughter. As the convoy came to a stop, General Harrison stepped forward, saluting briskly. "Admiral Jackson, welcome to Westbrook. We have your command briefing prepared." "Skip the pleasantries," Jackson said quietly. "I want to see my daughter." His tone was calm, but the air around him felt electrified. This wasn't the formal control of an admiral addressing subordinates. It was the kind of calm that made everyone else uneasy, the calm that comes before a reckoning. Harrison nodded once. "She's waiting inside." In the command building, Katherine Morgan stood by the window overlooking the airfield. She saw the convoy before the others did, her father's silhouette stepping out. The sight was surreal. She hadn't seen him outside a Pentagon office in nearly 3 years. When the door opened, she didn't turn immediately. She waited, listened, the quiet sound of boots approaching behind her. "You shouldn't have come," she said softly. "You think I had a choice." She turned then. The years had marked him: gray hair, deeper lines around the eyes, but his gaze was the same. Sharp, searching, protective in a way he tried to hide. "You're not here as my father," she said. "You're here as command." "I'm here," he replied, "because one of my officers struck a member of my family on a secure base, and because this entire chain of command is about to implode." There was a long silence between them, an invisible ocean of memories neither dared to cross. "You knew this would happen," he said finally. "You set this up." Her expression didn't change. "I exposed what was already there." He exhaled slowly. "And you think that justifies the cost?" "The cost?" Her eyes flickered. "What's the price of silence, Admiral?" For a moment he looked away. The question hit harder than she intended. She stepped forward, voice steady. "You taught me something once. That leadership isn't about who salutes first, it's about who stands last. I'm just standing where everyone else looked away." The silence stretched again, broken only by the faint hum of the air conditioning. Then, for the first time, his expression softened. "You look like your mother when you argue," he murmured. "She never backed down either," Katherine said quietly. A faint smile ghosted across his face, then it vanished. "Harrison wants a joint tribunal. You'll give testimony under sealed protocol." "And Captain Fletcher?" "He's in custody," Jackson said, "but this isn't just about him anymore." It never was, she replied. Down in the lower levels of the base, the Investigation Command Center hummed with tension. Screens glowed with data, emails, personnel files, psychological evaluations. A dozen officers and intelligence analysts moved with focused urgency. Brigadier General Martinez stood at the center of it all, eyes scanning a report. "We're uncovering deeper rot," she said, glancing at Harrison. "Captain Fletcher's aggression was just a symptom. 3 other officers have similar records buried under informal warnings. This isn't misconduct, it's culture." Harrison nodded grimly. "And we let it fester because they performed well in combat, because results excused behavior." "Not anymore," Martinez said. "The Pentagon's watching every move we make now." As if on cue, one of the analysts approached, holding a tablet. "Sir, we have a security intercept. An encrypted message sent 48 hours ago from Fletcher's personal terminal to a private address in D.C." Harrison frowned. "Play it." A distorted voice played through the speaker. "They're sending an evaluator. Pentagon, female, orders classified, find out what she's after, contain it if necessary." The room went silent. Harrison's expression hardened. Someone warned him this wasn't random. He knew she was coming. "Which means," Martinez said slowly, "someone inside the Pentagon leaked her visit." The air grew heavier. They weren't just dealing with one rogue officer, they were brushing against conspiracy. Meanwhile, Captain Fletcher sat in a guarded interview room. No windows, no clock, only the echo of his own breathing. He hadn't slept. The walls felt closer every hour. When the door opened, he looked up sharply. A man in civilian clothes entered, a Pentagon investigator. His demeanor calm, surgical. "Captain Fletcher, I'm Special Counsel Raymond Holt. I'll be overseeing your testimony." "I already gave my statement." "Not this one," Holt said. He set a small recorder on the table. "This one's off the record." Fletcher's eyes narrowed. "Off the record." "I want to know who told you about Major Morgan's arrival." The captain hesitated. The muscles in his jaw twitched. "You think I'm stupid," he said finally. "Someone high up wanted her exposed, said she was coming to evaluate us, said she'd tear down the chain of command if we let her. They told me to test her resolve." Their words, not mine. "Names," Holt said. Fletcher looked away. "If I give you names, I'm a dead man." Holt leaned closer. "Captain, you already are." Fletcher's breath caught. He closed his eyes as if trying to erase the image of the mess hall, the sound of the slap, the silence that followed. Then, finally, it came from inside the Office of Special Oversight. Someone with a 4-star contact. I don't know who signed it. Holt nodded once, turned off the recorder and stood. "That's enough for now." When the door shut behind him, Fletcher exhaled slowly, the weight of his own arrogance collapsing inward. For the first time, he realized he wasn't the top of the food chain. He was bait. By afternoon, Admiral Jackson sat in the base briefing room surrounded by Harrison, Martinez, and Morgan. The atmosphere was tense, heavy with unspoken truths. "This goes deeper than we thought," Harrison said. "Someone inside the Pentagon authorized a probe into Major Morgan's activities. They wanted her compromised." "Why?" Jackson asked. "Because she's been reviewing contractor oversight reports," Martinez replied. "Defense budget irregularities, black budget allocations. She's been auditing the people who move billions under secrecy." Jackson turned slowly toward his daughter. "You didn't tell me that." "You weren't supposed to know," Katherine said. "If I'd told you, it would have been compromised." For a moment, silence hung like a physical thing. Then Jackson laughed softly, not with amusement but disbelief. "You've become everything I trained you to be, and everything this system can't tolerate." "Truth doesn't need tolerance," she said quietly. Martinez glanced between them. "So where do we go from here?" Harrison folded his arms. "We prepare for containment. Once the media gets hold of this, it won't stop at the slap. They'll dig into command culture, black funding, systemic abuse, and Washington will need a scapegoat. And they'll want it clean, Martinez added. One villain, one headline. Jackson nodded slowly. Then we give them one. Everyone turned toward him. Captain Fletcher, Harrison asked. Jackson shook his head. Too small, too convenient. If we hand them Fletcher, they'll bury the rest. We need accountability upward, the kind that changes doctrine, not headlines. That could end careers, Martinez warned. Maybe it's time some ended, Jackson said quietly. His gaze drifted toward his daughter, including mine if necessary. The room went silent again. It wasn't defiance, it was resolve. As dusk fell, a storm gathered over the coastline. The wind howled through the hangars, rain hammering against metal roofs. The base lights flickered in the downpour. Katherine walked alone along the perimeter fence, her thoughts a quiet storm of their own. The day's events had revealed too much: corruption, complicity, and her father's weariness. She paused near the flagpole, the stars and stripes whipping violently in the wind. Rodriguez approached, umbrella in hand. "Major," he said softly, "permission to speak freely." She nodded. "I served under Captain Fletcher for 6 years," he said. "He wasn't always like this. War changes people. But what happened to him? What happened here? It's because the system lets broken men lead as long as they win." She looked at him, eyes thoughtful. "Do you think change is possible?" He hesitated. "Change," he gave a small smile. "Change in the military doesn't come from policy, ma'am. It comes from moments like this, when someone bleeds for the truth." She didn't answer right away. The rain ran down her face like tears she refused to shed. "Sometimes," she whispered, "bleeding isn't the hardest part. It's watching others pretend they don't see it." Rodriguez nodded slowly. "Then make them see it, ma'am." She looked back toward the command building, where lights still burned in the windows, where decisions were being written that would echo across careers and corridors of power. Her reflection shimmered in the wet glass. The bruise on her cheek had faded, but the mark it left behind would stay far longer. Inside, Admiral Jackson watched her from the window. The rain blurred her outline, but he knew that stance, the defiant calm, the quiet endurance. It was her mother's posture before she'd left him all those years ago, saying the system would one day eat its own. He'd spent decades proving her wrong. Now he wasn't sure he could. "You were right," he murmured. The storm outside rumbled like an answer. Tomorrow the Secretary of Defense would arrive. Hearings would begin. Lives would change. But tonight, as lightning split the sky and thunder rolled over the sea, there was only one truth Admiral Jackson couldn't escape. He had built a world where his daughter needed armor, just to survive her own uniform. And now that world was about to burn. Why did the secretary arrive without cameras? The next morning dawned gray, mist rising from the ocean like smoke. Naval Station Westbrook stood frozen under the weight of anticipation. Soldiers lined the road in silent formation as a sleek black helicopter descended through the fog. When the door opened, Secretary of Defense Alan Whitmore stepped out. No press, no entourage, no flags. Only 2 aides and the cold weight of authority that came from decades in Washington. He didn't shake hands or offer smiles. He simply looked around once, as though memorizing the air itself, then said quietly to General Harrison, "Let's get this over with." Inside the main command center, the tension was suffocating. Monitors flickered with live feeds from the mess hall, the brig, and the briefing chamber. Every officer in the room understood one thing. This was no longer about one slap or one officer. It was about the entire system that had allowed it to happen. Katherine sat at the far end of the long oak table, her posture steady, her hands folded. Across from her sat her father, Admiral Jackson, and beside him, Secretary Whitmore. The hum of fluorescent lights filled the silence. Major Morgan, Whitmore began, his tone controlled. You're aware that your presence here has escalated into a national security matter. Yes, sir. Your covert inspection of base command structure was not pre-cleared with my office. That's correct. He studied her, his eyes sharp. Then perhaps you can explain why you went off protocol. Katherine met his gaze without hesitation. Because protocol protects the powerful, not the vulnerable. The room went still. Whitmore leaned back slightly, hands clasped before him. You believe yourself above procedure. No, sir. I believe procedure is only as moral as the people enforcing it. Even Admiral Jackson's breath caught at that. There was no defiance in her tone, only truth, clean and unflinching. Whitmore turned to Harrison. The footage of Captain Fletcher's assault has leaked. CNN, Reuters, every major outlet has it. Who authorized release? No one, sir, Harrison said tightly. We locked down all external transmissions, but someone inside accessed the encrypted copy before we sealed it. The secretary's jaw tightened. Then we have a leak, find it. He rose, walked slowly toward the window overlooking the parade ground, and spoke softly, but every word carried like thunder. For 30 years I've defended this institution, through wars, scandals, and politics, but I'll tell you something, nothing destroys the military faster than arrogance in uniform. One act of unchecked power can undo a century of honor. He turned back to face them. So here's what we're going to do. Captain Fletcher will face court-martial, the colonel will be relieved, and the Pentagon will release an official statement by nightfall. And the culture that enabled them, Katherine asked quietly. Whitmore looked at her. That's not something we fix in a day. Then at least start with a truth, she said. Tell the country what really happens behind these walls. The secretary's expression didn't change, but something flickered behind his eyes, an old exhaustion, the kind that comes from knowing how deep the rot goes. You don't understand the cost of transparency, Major. And you don't understand the cost of silence, she replied. The two stared at each other across the table. It wasn't rebellion, it was conviction. Finally, Whitmore exhaled. You're your father's daughter, all right. No, sir, she said softly. He taught me to follow orders. I just learned when not to. Outside the briefing room, chaos brewed. Reporters camped near the perimeter fence, drones hovered beyond the restricted zone, and whispers filled every hallway. Rodriguez watched the scene unfold from the mess hall doorway. Soldiers who once laughed freely now spoke in hushed tones, uncertain who to trust. He turned to Petty Officer Hayes, who was hunched over a monitor. They're saying the footage hit social media before the networks even got it, Hayes whispered. Someone pushed it straight to the public. Someone wanted the world to see, Rodriguez said. He wasn't wrong. Within hours, every news channel carried the same image. A woman in uniform standing still after being struck by a superior officer. No words, no reaction, just silent strength. That stillness spoke louder than any speech could. Across the country, hashtags formed. Veterans commented, families debated. Some called her insubordinate, others called her brave, but everyone called her human. Meanwhile, in a secure conference room back in Washington, 3 senators huddled around a glowing tablet. The footage looped again and again. This is going to tear through the ranks, one muttered, especially with who she is. The admiral's daughter, another said, and she went undercover, Christ. The president's going to want a statement. They all looked at the same headline that was already trending online. Female officer struck during Pentagon inspection, whistleblower or setup. Back at Westbrook, the base braced for fallout. General Harrison called an emergency meeting. Effective immediately, all external communication lines are terminated. We've been instructed to prepare for full Pentagon oversight. That means every log, every file, every report, open for audit. Rodriguez raised an eyebrow. You think they'll find what they're looking for? They'll find everything, Harrison said grimly. The silence that followed wasn't fear, it was anticipation. For years, men like Fletcher had thrived in shadow. Now light was coming. That night, Katherine walked through the rain-soaked courtyard toward the chapel. The base was almost silent, except for the sound of distant thunder and the rhythmic hum of generators. She sat on one of the wooden pews, hands folded loosely. The smell of old varnish and candle wax filled the air. After a while, she heard the soft creak of the door. Her father entered, his expression unreadable. He sat beside her without a word. For a long moment, neither spoke. Finally, she said quietly, "I didn't mean for this to reach the press." "You didn't leak it." "No, but someone wanted it seen." He nodded. Maybe that's what it needed. She looked at him, surprised. "You think this helps the Navy?" He sighed. "No, but maybe it helps the truth, and that's bigger than the Navy." She turned away, her eyes glistening in the candlelight. "You once told me honor isn't about medals or commands. It's about what you do when no one's watching. Well, someone finally watched." He gave a faint, sad smile, and they'll never unsee it. For the first time in years, he reached out, hesitated, then placed a hand over hers. "You didn't just expose a man, Katherine. You exposed a mirror. The question now is whether any of us can stand to look." A tear slipped down her cheek, quiet and unashamed. By morning, the storm had cleared, but the real one was only beginning. The Pentagon released a short statement acknowledging an incident involving a field officer and a visiting official, and promised swift, transparent investigation. But the press had already decided the narrative. On television screens across the country, clips of Katherine's still face played beneath bold headlines. Panels debated what it meant for women in uniform, for power, for discipline. And then something unexpected happened. Hundreds of female service members, Army, Air Force, Navy, posted photos of themselves in uniform with the caption, "I stand still." Within 24 hours, it became a movement. Inside the base, morale shifted. Soldiers who had once whispered began to speak. Anonymous messages poured into internal hotlines, reports of misconduct, abuse, manipulation, all ignored for years. General Martinez compiled them in silence, her jaw set. "It's like a floodgate opened," she told Harrison. "We should have known." Harrison nodded grimly. "Maybe we did, we just didn't want to see." "And what about the Admiral's daughter?" she asked softly. "She lit the match," he said. "Now the whole building's seeing smoke." In the brig, Captain Fletcher watched the news feed on a small screen. He barely recognized himself. The man shouting in the video looked like a stranger, rage frozen in high definition. He turned away, eyes hollow. When the door opened, Special Counsel Holt entered again. "They're offering you a deal," he said. "Cooperate with the Pentagon inquiry, name the people who contacted you, and they'll reduce your sentence." Fletcher laughed, a dry, broken sound. "Sentence? You think I care about that?" Holt studied him. "You care about survival." The captain's gaze drifted to the small window above his bunk. A sliver of gray daylight seeped through the bars. "No," he said quietly. "I care about being remembered for something better than this." For the first time, he looked genuinely human. "Tell them I'll talk." At sunset, Katherine stood again on the balcony of her temporary quarters, watching the sky burn orange over the sea. The base below moved with slow rhythm. MPs, maintenance crews, officers trying to act normal in a place that no longer was. Her father joined her, 2 cups of black coffee in hand. "Tomorrow's hearing will be closed door," he said. "They'll want statements from both of us." She took the cup, and then we wait for Washington to decide which truth is worth telling." She smiled faintly. "They'll polish it until it hurts less." "Probably." They stood in silence for a long time, listening to the waves. Finally, she said softly, "Do you ever regret it? The career, the politics, the compromises?" He didn't answer right away. Then, every day, but regret doesn't rewrite history, it just reminds you you're still human. She looked at him, her expression calm, resolute. Then maybe it's time history met humanity again. He studied her face, the quiet strength, the steadiness in her eyes, and nodded slowly. Maybe it's time. That night, long after the base had gone dark, a single transmission left the secure network. No sender, no trace, just a classified memo marked Pentagon Internal Culture Audit Proposal. At the bottom, one line of text stood out, unsigned but unmistakable. Change does not begin in silence. It begins with someone who refuses to look away. And somewhere in the quiet corridors of power, a light turned on. Why did the room feel colder than a battlefield? The Pentagon's Sublevel 3 hearing chamber was never meant for cameras or applause. The walls were soundproof, the light a pale gray that made everything seem more clinical than human. 3 flags stood behind the long oak dais: the United States, the Department of Defense, and the Navy. Their stillness was the only calm thing in the room. At the center table sat Major Katherine Morgan, her posture perfect, uniform immaculate. To her left was Admiral Thomas Jackson, her father. Across from them, Secretary of Defense Alan Whitmore, General Harrison, and 2 civilian auditors from the Senate Oversight Committee. Every person in the room knew the stakes. The decision made here would ripple across every command, every briefing room, every woman and man who wore the uniform. But for Katherine, it was simpler. It wasn't about policy or headlines. It was about truth and what she could still live with. "Major Morgan," Whitmore began, "this hearing is confidential. Nothing said here will reach the public unless authorized by the department. Do you understand?" "Yes, sir." "Your covert inspection of Naval Station Westbrook resulted in a public scandal, a base lockdown, and the detainment of a commanding officer. Do you accept responsibility for the consequences of your actions?" Katherine paused, then nodded. "Yes, sir, I do." Whitmore leaned forward. "Then explain, what exactly were you looking for?" Her gaze was steady. "Command integrity. I was assessing leadership culture in forward-deployed installations, how officers treat subordinates, how discipline is enforced, how silence is maintained." "And did you find what you were looking for?" "Yes," she said softly, "and more than I wanted to." The auditor beside Whitmore scribbled a note. "You're implying systemic misconduct." Katherine didn't flinch. "I'm stating it, not everywhere, not everyone, but enough to make silence a weapon." Whitmore exchanged a glance with Harrison. "Major, some have accused you of provoking Captain Fletcher, of deliberately testing him." She looked down briefly, then back up. "I didn't provoke him, I gave him a choice. Respect or retaliation. He made his own decision." The words hung in the air, heavy and clean. Whitmore tapped a finger against the table. "And your failure to reveal your rank was intentional," she said, "because real authority shouldn't depend on visibility. It should depend on discipline." For a moment, even Whitmore said nothing. Then he asked more quietly, "And what do you think discipline means, Major?" She answered without hesitation. "Control, not dominance, not fear, just control." Her voice cracked slightly on that last word, and something in the room shifted, the kind of shift that happens when truth cuts through ceremony. The questioning continued for hours. Each answer peeled away layers of the institution's armor, informal cover-ups, boys' club favoritism, the cultural immunity of high-performing officers. She spoke carefully, never accusing individuals, but painting a picture too precise to ignore. By the second hour, even the stenographer had slowed her typing, watching Katherine like she was reading scripture instead of testimony. When Whitmore finally called for a recess, the room exhaled as one. Outside, Katherine stepped into the long corridor that stretched like a sterile artery through the Pentagon's heart. Her father joined her a moment later. He said nothing at first, just walked beside her in silence. The faint hum of fluorescent lights filled the space between them. Finally he spoke. "You're not making allies in there." "I'm not here to make allies." "You're not here to make enemies either." She stopped walking, turning to face him. "Then what am I here to do exactly? Watch another generation of soldiers pretend not to see?" His jaw tightened. "You think I don't know what's broken? I've spent my life trying to hold it together." "You've spent your life holding the wrong thing together," she said. "You held the image, not the people." The words hit like a strike. He looked away, breath catching just slightly, the kind of reaction only family could provoke. "You sound like your mother," he said quietly. She believed in truth too. And it destroyed her. Katherine's voice softened. "No, father," it freed her. They stood in silence. Between them stretched the weight of 2 generations of loyalty, one built on obedience, the other on conscience. Then a voice interrupted from down the hall. "Major Morgan, the secretary wants to see you privately." She turned toward the aide, nodded once and walked away. Inside Whitmore's private office, the air felt heavier. The blinds were drawn and a folder sat open on the desk. Katherine stood at attention. Whitmore gestured for her to sit. "Off the record," he said. She remained standing. "You're a difficult woman to intimidate," he observed. "I've had practice, sir." He studied her for a long moment, then opened the folder. "Do you know what this is?" She glanced down. Classified files. Her entire career, mission reports, commendations, psych evaluations. The last page was stamped pending review, disciplinary recommendation. "They want to suspend you," he said. She nodded slowly. "I expected that." "They'll say it's for operational misconduct, unlawful surveillance, breach of secrecy." "Because it's easier than saying moral courage makes them nervous." Whitmore almost smiled. "You really don't care what they do to you, do you?" She looked him straight in the eyes. "Sir, when you've watched good people die under bad leaders, you stop fearing paperwork." The room went quiet. Whitmore leaned back, his voice softening. "Your father's risking his entire command for you. He's lobbying the Joint Chiefs right now to keep this hearing internal. He knows what happens if this goes public." "So do I," she said, "and I think it should." He sighed deeply. "You leak this, Major, and you destroy him. You destroy yourself. You destroy whatever trust the American people still have in us." Katherine's voice was barely above a whisper. "Then maybe it's time they stop trusting a system that hides behind that word." He stood, suddenly older. "Do you have any idea what kind of storm you're summoning?" She met his gaze without blinking. "Yes, sir, the kind that cleans." Later that evening, the Pentagon corridors were emptying out. Most officers had gone home, but a few lights still glowed in quiet corners. In one of them, Admiral Jackson sat alone in a conference room, staring at a blank document on a secure terminal. The cursor blinked at him, a pulse of indecision. The document header read, "Formal Resignation, Naval Special Warfare Command." His finger hovered over the keyboard. He thought of his daughter, of his wife, of the men and women he'd sent into battle, of the price paid in silence. When the door opened, Katherine stepped in. "You're writing it, aren't you?" He didn't answer. She walked closer. "If you resign, they'll use you as the shield. They'll say it was one man's failure of oversight and close the book." "Maybe that's the point," he said. "No, the point is change. If you fall on the sword, they'll build another empire over your grave." He turned toward her. "Then what do you suggest I do?" "Stand with me. Don't protect the system, expose it." He stared at her, torn between instinct and pride, duty and blood. Finally he said, "You don't know what you're asking." "I do," she whispered. "I'm asking you to be the man you wanted me to become." The words landed with surgical precision. His shoulders sagged slightly, the weight of command, of guilt, of love too long buried. Then he nodded slowly, painfully. All right. The next day, the hearing resumed. Whitmore entered the chamber with a folder in hand. We've reviewed the findings, he announced. Before we finalize recommendations, Admiral Jackson has a statement. Jackson rose. The room fell silent. Even the hum of the lights seemed to fade. For decades, he began, we've told ourselves that strength comes from order, that obedience keeps us whole. But I've watched that obedience protect the wrong people for too long. He paused, looked toward his daughter. What happened at Westbrook wasn't an isolated failure. It was the inevitable result of a culture that punishes silence only when it's inconvenient. And my daughter did what none of us had the courage to do. She faced it without flinching. His voice grew quieter. So if punishment must be handed down, give it to me. But don't you dare call her insubordinate. Call her what she is, a soldier who remembered what her oath actually meant. No one moved. The civilian auditors exchanged uncertain glances. Even Whitmore's expression faltered. Then slowly the secretary said, Admiral, do you understand what you're saying? Perfectly, Jackson said. I'm saying truth outranks loyalty. The silence that followed wasn't bureaucratic. It was sacred. Hours later, long after the hearing adjourned, Katherine walked alone across the Pentagon courtyard. The sun had set, leaving the marble buildings bathed in amber glow. Her phone buzzed, a message, unmarked sender. Your father's statement was leaked. The public knows everything. Brace yourself. She stopped walking, heart heavy, not with fear but with inevitability. Above her, floodlights flickered on, washing the courtyard in pale light. Somewhere deep inside the building, alarms would start ringing, not emergency alarms but political ones. She looked up at the night sky, whispered softly, let it come. By dawn, every news channel in America carried the same clip, Admiral Jackson's voice, steady and unwavering. Truth outranks loyalty. It spread like wildfire. Veterans quoted it. Cadets repeated it. Families of fallen soldiers painted it on banners. And in one quiet office overlooking the Potomac, Secretary Whitmore watched it all unfold in silence. His aide asked, Sir, what do we do? He didn't answer for a long time. Then finally he said, we tell the truth. Back at Naval Station Westbrook, the flag rose again in the morning wind. Rodriguez stood at attention, hand to his brow, pride and pain mixing in equal measure. He murmured under his breath, took one slap to wake the whole system. Katherine watched from the distance, her face unreadable. The storm had begun not of weather but of consequence. But somewhere beneath that storm, she felt something she hadn't in years. Hope. Why did the truth make her feel smaller, not larger? It had been 48 hours since Admiral Jackson's statement went public, and the world no longer looked the same. The Pentagon's glass facade was ringed with cameras. Reporters shouted questions into microphones as if volume could force clarity. Across the country, screens replayed the same line over and over. Truth outranks loyalty. Inside those walls, silence had become a different kind of weapon. Major Katherine Morgan sat alone in her temporary office, the blinds half drawn. The fluorescent light above flickered, its hum syncing with the low buzz of her phone, thousands of unread messages, interview requests, angry letters, threats, praise, chaos. She hadn't slept. Every network wanted her face. Every official wanted her silence. Her reflection in the glass looked foreign, the same uniform but different eyes. The kind that have seen too much, said too little, and paid for both. The door opened quietly. General Maria Martinez stepped inside, 2 coffees in hand. You look like hell, she said softly. I feel worse, Katherine replied. Martinez placed 1 cup beside her. They're calling you the woman who stood still. I didn't stand still for them. Doesn't matter, Martinez said. They needed a story, you gave them one. Katherine exhaled slowly. I didn't want to be a story. Martinez sat across from her. Symbols never do, but they don't get to choose. The room fell quiet. Outside, flashes from camera crews lit the corridor like silent lightning. What happens now? Katherine asked. Now, Martinez said, now everyone decides which side of the truth they can live with. Across the river in a sleek Washington news studio, the story played out in real time. Panels debated motives, ethics, loyalty. One retired colonel sneered, she disobeyed protocol. Another replied, she obeyed conscience. The screen behind them flashed clips of protests outside military academies, cadets holding signs that read, integrity isn't insubordination, and honor has no rank. Public opinion had split the nation down a line no one expected, those who saw her as a hero and those who saw her as a threat. Inside the Pentagon, that same divide had hardened into something far more dangerous. General Harrison stood in the secretary's office, the news muted on a wall-mounted screen. They're calling for a public inquiry, he said. Full transparency. The Joint Chiefs want blood. Secretary Whitmore stared at the screen, unmoving. They'll have to decide whose. The Admiral's resignation didn't calm it. It poured gasoline on it, Whitmore said quietly. The President wants containment, Congress wants spectacle, and half the Defense Department wants her court-martialed to prove we still control our own narrative. And you? Harrison asked carefully. Whitmore looked at him, eyes tired. I think she's the only honest person left in this building. Meanwhile, Katherine walked through a corridor lined with portraits, admirals, generals, men carved in oil and pride. Their painted eyes seemed to follow her as she passed. Rodriguez's words from days ago echoed in her head. Change in the military doesn't come from policy. It comes from moments like this, when someone bleeds for the truth. She stopped at the last portrait, her father's. It had been hung only 6 months ago, after his appointment to Special Warfare Command. The plaque beneath it gleamed. Admiral Thomas Jackson, courage through command. She traced the letters with her eyes, whispering, Courage through truth, Dad, you taught me that. A voice broke the silence. You shouldn't be here. She turned to see Special Counsel Holt, the same man who'd interrogated Fletcher. They're moving against you, he said. The Oversight Committee is recommending criminal review, unauthorized data acquisition, chain of command breach, classified exposure. She almost smiled. They always find the legal words for moral fear. This isn't a joke, Major. You're being hung out to dry. I expected nothing less. Holt hesitated. You still have allies, General Martinez, Secretary Whitmore, even a few senators off record, but if this goes to trial, none of them can save you. Then let it go to trial, she said. Why? He demanded. You've already won public sympathy. Because sympathy changes nothing, judgment does. That evening, she met her father in a secure briefing room. He looked older than she remembered, not because of age, but because truth had a way of peeling years off illusion. They're going to drag you through the mud, he warned. They'll call you unstable, insubordinate, reckless. Then they'll finally see me as human, she said. He looked at her, eyes soft but voice sharp. You think this makes things better? No, but it makes them honest. He sat heavily, rubbing his temples. I can fight for your clearance. I can delay hearings, buy time. Don't, she interrupted. Don't spend the rest of your career cleaning up what truth exposed. His shoulders slumped. You sound just like her. Mom. She once told me that integrity isn't the same as loyalty. I didn't understand it then. I do now. For the first time, she smiled. Then maybe we're both learning. By midnight, leaks hit the internet again. Classified memos, internal reports, decades of ignored misconduct complaints. No one knew where they came from. All anyone knew was that they were real. The Pentagon scrambled. Phones rang through the night. Journalists worked feverishly, cross-checking data, confirming sources. And then at 3:17 a.m., the world woke to a headline no one expected. Pentagon leaks CONFIRMS cover-up culture. Internal FILES expose pattern of abuse. The name Major Katherine Morgan was mentioned in every paragraph. By morning, she was summoned to Whitmore's office. The secretary looked like he hadn't slept either. "Tell me it wasn't you," he said. "It wasn't," she replied truthfully, "but I won't apologize for what surfaced." He slammed a folder shut. "You have any idea how bad this is? The president wants a televised inquiry. Congress smells blood. Every lobbyist in Washington is circling like sharks." She remained calm, then stopped pretending the ocean isn't full of them. He stared at her, and for the first time he didn't see a subordinate. He saw a mirror. "You realize you've become the symbol of everything half this building fears," he said. "Then maybe they should be afraid." The televised inquiry was scheduled for Monday. In the days leading up to it, the world seemed to hold its breath. News anchors called it the truth hearings. Social media turned Katherine into a symbol. Some painted her as a patriot, others as a traitor. Her image appeared on protest banners, murals, even magazine covers. But in her hotel room that night, she sat in silence, staring at the small mirror above the desk. The face staring back wasn't a hero's. It was tired, worn, haunted. She whispered to herself, "You wanted to fix something. Now you're just trying to survive it." A knock on the door interrupted her thoughts. It was General Martinez. "You holding up?" "I don't know what that means anymore." Martinez sat on the edge of the bed. "Tomorrow's going to be brutal. They'll twist every word, make you doubt yourself." "I've doubted everything already." "Then use it," Martinez said. "Doubt isn't weakness, Katherine. It's the sign you still have a conscience." Katherine looked down. "I'm not scared for myself." "Then who?" She hesitated. "For him, my father. He spent his life building the house I just set on fire." Martinez nodded slowly. "Maybe some houses need to burn before they can be rebuilt." The next morning, the hearing room was transformed into a stage. Rows of cameras, journalists, senators, the weight of a nation watching. Katherine entered in full uniform. The crowd hushed. She took her seat beneath the bright lights, her father watching from the gallery, hands folded tightly. A senator leaned toward his microphone. "Major Morgan, you are aware that you are testifying under oath?" "Yes, sir." "Then tell us plainly, did you leak classified information to the public?" "No, sir." "But you stand by the message it revealed?" She paused. "I stand by the truth, whoever released it." The senator frowned. "Major, do you realize your actions have compromised national security?" "No, sir. My actions exposed that our security was already compromised by the people we trusted to protect it." A murmur swept through the crowd. Another senator leaned in. "You've been called reckless, emotional, and dangerous to the chain of command. How do you respond?" She looked straight into the camera. Not the senators, not the officials, but the millions watching. "If discipline means silence in the face of abuse, then yes, I'm dangerous to that chain." For a long moment, no one spoke. Even the lights seemed to hum quieter. Then the chairman cleared his throat. "Major Morgan, why risk your career for this?" She took a breath. "Because I swore an oath, not to power, not to rank, but to defend the Constitution of the United States against all enemies, foreign and domestic. I just didn't realize how close the domestic ones stood." Gasps, cameras clicked. Her father's eyes glistened, though he didn't move. When the hearing adjourned, the world had already made up its mind. Outside, crowds chanted her name. Some cursed it. Protesters waved flags, held signs that read "Truth has no uniform" and "Morgan for secretary." Inside, Katherine sat in the quiet of the empty chamber. The echo of her own words haunted her. Martinez entered quietly. "You did it." "Did what?" "You told the truth." Katherine looked up, her eyes weary. "Then why does it still feel like I lost something?" Martinez smiled faintly. "Because you did. The part of you that still believed you could win and stay clean." Katherine exhaled. "And what's left?" "The part that'll live forever." That night she visited the old Arlington section of the military cemetery. The wind was cold, the sky black and starless. Rows of white stones stretched like silent witnesses. She stopped at one, Rebecca Morgan, 1961–2002, her mother. Katherine knelt, resting her hand on the cold marble. "You said truth would cost me everything," she whispered. "You were right." The wind shifted, carrying the faint sound of distant traffic, the hum of a city that never slept. She stood, squared her shoulders, and saluted. "But you were also right about this," she said softly. "It was worth it." And as she turned to leave, the first faint light of dawn broke over the horizon, pale, uncertain but real. Why does silence hurt more when the world finally listens? It had been 3 weeks since the hearing. 3 weeks since the world had seen her face on every screen. 3 weeks since her father's words, "Truth outranks loyalty," had burned through the marble halls of power like a flare dropped into dry grass. And yet the noise was already fatting. The news cycle had shifted. Another scandal, another headline. The crowds that once filled the Pentagon steps were gone now, the chants replaced by traffic, the fury replaced by fatigue. The world had moved on. But she hadn't. Major Katherine Morgan sat on a park bench overlooking the Potomac, the morning light catching on the water's slow ripples. She wore civilian clothes now. Her uniform, the one that had once carried a nation's arguments, hung untouched in her closet. She sipped cold coffee, the bitter taste grounding her in the present. Across the river, she could see the faint glint of the Pentagon's walls, like a monument to everything she had both defended and dismantled. Footsteps approached, a familiar voice followed. "You're hard to track down, Major." She turned to see General Maria Martinez approaching, 2 takeaway cups in hand. "Not Major anymore," Katherine said softly. Martinez raised an eyebrow. "They make it official." "Last week, administrative discharge, conduct unbecoming." "And your clearance?" Katherine gave a small, wry smile. "Revoked, but they let me keep the memories." Martinez handed her a fresh coffee, sitting beside her. "You knew this would happen." "Knowing doesn't make it easier." The two women sat in silence, watching a pair of rowboats glide across the river. "You changed things," Martinez said finally. "Did I?" "The committees are still arguing. The same people are still in charge. They'll rename the problem, rebrand the policy, and call it reform." Martinez shook her head. "That's not what changed. You gave people permission to see. That's bigger than policy." Katherine didn't answer right away. "Seeing isn't enough, Maria. You can't build anything on awareness alone. It needs courage to last." Martinez studied her quietly. "Then maybe your job was to plant courage, not harvest it." Across town, Admiral Thomas Jackson stood in front of a Senate subcommittee, his uniform stripped of active command insignia. He offered his resignation weeks ago, but the Defense Council refused to accept it. "We can't let this look like admission of guilt," they had said. He'd laughed bitterly. "You think guilt waits for permission." Now, under the bright lights of yet another televised session, he spoke slowly, deliberately. "If my daughter's actions damaged the institution," he said, "then perhaps the institution wasn't as strong as we believed. Honor should not fear exposure." A senator leaned forward. "Do you condone what she did, Admiral?" Jackson's gaze didn't waver. "I condone the courage it took to do it." The audience behind him shifted, some approving, others tense. Cameras zoomed in on the weary lines of his face. He had become a reluctant father of reform, a living reminder that legacy and integrity rarely share the same room. When he stepped outside afterward, reporters surged forward. "Admiral, will you run for office? Do you still believe your daughter was right?" He said only one thing before stepping into the car. "I believe she made us remember who we were supposed to be." That evening, Katherine stood in her small apartment, staring at the neatly folded uniform on her couch. The silver insignia still caught light like a secret. She reached out and ran a hand over the fabric. Memories flashed: deployment briefings, cold tarmac under desert stars, faces she'd lost and faces she'd saved. All of it had led to this quiet room. A knock came at the door. She hesitated, then opened it. Rodriguez stood there, his posture still as straight as ever, though retirement had softened the edges. "Ma'am," he said with a faint smile, "didn't think I'd see you out of uniform." "Neither did I," she replied. He handed her a small envelope. "This came through unofficial channels. Thought you should see it." Inside was a letter, Pentagon stationery, hand-signed by Secretary Whitmore. "Major Morgan, the department acknowledges that your actions initiated the most comprehensive internal ethics reform in modern military history. Though your conduct violated protocol, your intent restored principle. History will decide which mattered more. A.W." She read it twice, then folded it neatly back into the envelope. "Guess that's as close to an apology as Washington gets," Rodriguez said. "Maybe," she murmured, "but it's not for me, it's for them." He nodded slowly. "Still, it's something." They stood there for a moment, two soldiers bound by an unspoken understanding. "You heading somewhere?" he asked finally. She looked past him, toward the setting sun bleeding over the city skyline. "Eventually. Somewhere quiet." She smiled faintly. "Somewhere honest." Days passed. The world kept spinning. The hearings faded into archives, the reforms into footnotes. But quietly, changes began. Command accountability logs, independent complaint reviews, whistleblower protections, small steps, fragile, bureaucratic, but real. In bases across the world, young officers whispered her name like a rumor. Major Morgan, a story told in barracks and classrooms, sometimes mocked, sometimes revered. In Annapolis, a cadet in her third year looked at the photo of Katherine in a textbook and whispered, "She stood still so we wouldn't have to." Meanwhile, Whitmore sat alone in his office overlooking the Potomac. The sun was setting behind the Lincoln Memorial, washing the city in orange. He reread the transcript of Katherine's testimony, the words underlined in blue ink. "I swore an oath to defend against all enemies, foreign and domestic." He closed the file slowly. A knock came at the door. His aide stepped in. "Sir, the press is still asking whether you plan to run for vice president." Whitmore smiled faintly. "Tell them I'm running out of excuses, not offices." The aide hesitated. "And about Major Morgan?" He interrupted softly. "Tell them she reminded me what the oath actually means." Late one night, Katherine found herself driving with no destination. The highway stretched endlessly ahead, moonlight washing over the empty road. The radio played softly, a reporter discussing the Morgan reforms, as the press had begun to call them. The phrase made her chest tighten. It sounded too neat, too polished, too far from the messy truth of what it had cost. She turned off the radio. Miles later, she stopped at a rest area overlooking a vast stretch of open land, old farmland, long abandoned. The night air was cold, the stars impossibly bright. For the first time in months, she let herself breathe. No rank, no chain of command, no noise. Just the sound of wind through dry grass. She whispered to herself, "It's strange. The truth saves everyone except the one who tells it." The next morning, her phone buzzed with a message from an unknown number. "Teaching position open at Quantico, ethics and field command, interested." She stared at it for a long time. Then she typed one word in reply, yes. Months later, the classroom was quiet. Rows of cadets sat in perfect attention as she entered, her posture as steady as ever, her uniform stripped of insignia but carrying a different weight now. "Morning class," she said. A murmur of greetings followed. She looked at their faces, young, sharp, idealistic, the kind she once had. "You've read the reports," she said. "You've seen the hearings, you know what happened." No one spoke. "Good," she continued, "because I'm not here to make you agree with me. I'm here to make you think about what happens when obedience and morality don't line up." She paused, letting the silence sit heavy. "So here's my question, what would you have done?" A few cadets shifted uncomfortably. Others stared straight ahead. One finally raised her hand. "Ma'am, would you do it again?" Katherine smiled faintly, tired but proud. "Yes," she said, "because truth only costs you once. Living without it costs you forever." The room fell into reverent quiet. Outside, the morning sun lit the academy grounds. The flag rose against a clear blue sky. And for the first time since the storm began, Katherine Morgan felt peace. That evening, she walked across the campus courtyard, the sound of boots on concrete echoing faintly. She stopped by a statue dedicated to fallen service members. Someone had placed a small metal plate at its base. The engraving read, "Courage is not the absence of obedience, it's the presence of conscience." She smiled. "You'd have liked that one, Mom." The wind carried the faint scent of rain. Somewhere far off, thunder rolled, gentle this time, like a heartbeat instead of a warning. And as she stood there, the voice of her father echoed in her memory. "Truth outranks loyalty." She whispered back into the dusk, "And dignity doesn't speak, it simply acts." Then she turned toward the lighted halls behind her, ready to teach the next generation what she had learned the hardest way possible. That silence might protect power, but truth protects the soul. Why do some stories end long after the world stops listening? It had been 8 years. 8 years since Naval Station Westbrook. 8 years since a single slap had ignited a storm through the corridors of power. 8 years since Major Katherine Morgan stood before the nation and said words that could not be unsaid. The country had changed in ways too subtle for headlines. Policies evolved, leadership programs rewritten, whistleblower protections no longer whispered about but written into doctrine. They called it the Morgan Doctrine now, a term that made Katherine cringe every time she heard it. She had never wanted a doctrine. She had only wanted decency. The Quantico campus was quiet under the early autumn light. Cadets marched in the distance, the rhythm of their boots steady, certain, clean. In one of the older classrooms, Katherine stood at the lectern, now a full professor of military ethics and command leadership. The years had marked her gently, silver in her hair, deeper lines near her eyes, but her presence hadn't faded. Her students said she didn't need to raise her voice. Silence did it for her. Today was her final lecture before retirement. She looked out at the room, young faces, uniforms crisp, notebooks open. 8 years ago, she began softly, I stood on a different kind of battlefield, one without weapons but full of wounds. The cadets listened, every word caught in the air. I learned something there, she continued. That courage doesn't always look like charging forward. Sometimes it looks like standing still. A hand rose near the back. A young woman, dark-haired, eyes sharp. "Ma'am," she said, "do you ever regret it?" Katherine smiled faintly, the question expected but still personal. "Every day," she said, "and not at all." She walked slowly around the room as she spoke, her tone low, like storytelling rather than instruction. "Regret means you cared, but if I'd stayed silent, that would have been worse. Silence corrodes from the inside out." Another cadet spoke. "My mother says you changed everything, ma'am." Katherine shook her head. "No, I changed something. The rest is up to you." The room was quiet. Only the faint hum of the projector filled the air. "We talk about leadership as if it's about control," she said. "But true leadership is the willingness to stand alone, to do what's right when no one's watching and no one's clapping." She stopped, turning toward the window where sunlight poured in like memory. "One act of truth won't fix the world," she said softly, "but it will change you, and that's where it starts." Later, when the class ended, cadets lined up one by one to shake her hand. Most said nothing, just quiet nods, a simple thank you. But their eyes spoke for them. After the last one left, Katherine lingered in the empty classroom. She placed a hand on the lectern, the wood worn smooth from years of lectures. She whispered to the room, "You were my second battlefield." Then she gathered her notes, turned off the lights, and walked out. Outside, the air smelled of rain and pine. Across the quad stood a small memorial, a simple stone engraved with the words, "For those who told the truth and stood alone." Her name wasn't carved there, but it didn't need to be. Everyone knew. She sat on the nearby bench, the cool wind tugging at her hair. From here, she could see the flagpole, the same one cadets saluted every morning. For a long moment, she simply watched. And then a voice broke the quiet. "Thought I'd find you here." She turned. It was General Maria Martinez, older now, walking with a cane, her uniform still immaculate. "You never did learn how to disappear," Martinez said. "I tried once," Katherine replied. "Didn't work." Martinez sat beside her. The two women shared a long silence, the kind that only comes between soldiers who have seen each other at their best and their breaking. "The board's nomming a new ethics center after you," Martinez said finally. Katherine groaned softly. "They don't have to do that." "They want to, they need to. They should name it after the ones who came forward after me, the ones who didn't have protection, or family names, or medals." Martinez smiled faintly. "They'd tell you they learned to come forward because of you." Katherine didn't answer. She just stared at the flag, her eyes thoughtful, far away. "Do you ever miss it?" Martinez asked quietly. "The uniform." "No, the belief that we could fix it." Katherine took a long breath. "I never lost that belief. I just stopped thinking it would happen in my lifetime." That night, the sky broke open with rain. Katherine sat at her kitchen table, the sound of thunder rolling in the distance. Papers were spread before her, letters, photographs, a life's worth of memories. Among them was one sealed envelope. The handwriting on the front was unmistakable, Thomas Jackson. Her father's will. He passed away the year before, quietly, without ceremony. The last thing he'd told her was, "Don't let the truth make you bitter." She hadn't opened the letter until now. Her hands trembled slightly as she broke the seal. Inside, a single page. His handwriting neat, deliberate, careful as always. "Katherine, if you're reading this, it means I finally lost my argument with time. I spent a lifetime defending the system. You spent yours redeeming it. We were both right and both wrong. I used to think leadership was about command. You showed me it's about conscience. Whatever the world remembers, know this. I was proud long before they were. Love always. Dad." Her vision blurred. The ink smudged as a tear landed on the page. For a long time she just sat there, letting the rain speak for her. Weeks later, Katherine attended the dedication ceremony for the new Jackson Morgan Institute for Ethical Command. The crowd was large: cadets, officers, reporters, and old friends. The banner hung high against the marble facade. When she stepped onto the podium, applause rippled through the courtyard. She raised a hand gently. "Please," she said, "save the applause for the ones who still serve." Silence fell. She looked out at the rows of faces, young, hopeful, expectant. "8 years ago, I learned what silence can protect," she began. "But I also learned what it can destroy." Her voice steadied. "Truth isn't comfortable. It doesn't arrive with permission or approval. It's heavy, it's inconvenient, and it's costly. But it's the only thing that makes honor mean something. She paused, her eyes catching the morning light. So if you ever find yourself standing alone, wondering if it's worth it, it is. Because integrity doesn't need applause. It only needs witnesses. The audience sat still, absorbing every syllable. She looked down at her father's folded flag resting on the podium. He used to say, "Truth outranks loyalty. I'd like to add something." Her voice softened to a whisper, but the microphone carried it perfectly. And dignity doesn't speak, it simply acts. The wind picked up as if in response, tugging at the flags overhead. When the ceremony ended, she walked off stage, her steps steady, quiet, content. Later that evening, she stood at the edge of the campus overlooking the river. The sun had set, and the horizon burned with the last light of day, that fragile orange glow that comes just before night takes over. Footsteps approached from behind. A young cadet, the same one who'd asked her years ago if she regretted it. "Professor Morgan." "Hem." "I just wanted to say, my mother was in uniform when the hearings happened. She said watching you gave her courage to stay." Katherine smiled softly. "Then it was worth every bruise." "Can I ask you something?" the cadet said. "How do you know when it's time to speak?" Katherine looked at her for a long moment, then answered gently. "When silence starts to feel like betrayal." The cadet nodded slowly, as if writing it into her soul. When she left, Katherine turned back toward the dark river, her reflection rippling with the light of the campus behind her. For the first time in years, she felt something like peace, not the quiet kind that hides from the world, but the deeper kind that comes when you've already faced it. She whispered to herself, "You did it, Mom. You were right, truth saves us, just not the way we expect." Then she walked back toward the light, toward the echo of voices, the cadence of marching feet, the living pulse of the institution she had once broken to make whole again. The wind carried her words away into the night. And somewhere between the sound of the river and the rustle of the flags, it was as if the world itself answered. That sometimes the most powerful revolution begins with a single, still act of dignity.